All types of people were aboard, famous industrialists and actors, along with immigrants heading to America in pursuit of a better life. The ship was under the command of the 62-year-old senior captain, Edward John Smith. There was great excitement surrounding this ship among the passengers, the general public, and the media. It wasn't just the world's largest ship, measuring around 269 meters in length and standing more than 53 meters tall. The luxury it offered was absolutely breathtaking. At that time, the ship's construction cost $7.5 million, which, when adjusted for inflation, amounts to approximately $400 million today. The amenities and interior decor on this ship could even surpass those of a five-star hotel. Stained glass mirrors, intricate wood paneling, 2 grand staircases, a heated swimming pool, a Turkish bath, an electric bath, a gym, a squash court, 4 restaurants, 2 barbershops, and even a library. Additionally, the safety features implemented in the Titanic's design led people to believe that the ship was unsinkable. It was considered a vessel that simply could not sink. It was thought to be that safe. The company responsible for building this ship was White Star Line. The vice president of the company was so confident about this ship that he publicly declared it to be unsinkable. However, just 2 days after beginning its maiden voyage, on April 12, 1912, the Titanic started receiving its first ice warnings. The Atlantic Ocean, which Titanic was crossing en route to America, was filled with ice. There were towering masses of ice, icebergs, which posed a serious threat to the ship. Such warnings were not out of the ordinary. Ships traveling through oceans often use radio to communicate and alert nearby vessels about the presence of ice in the area and advise caution on their route. Upon receiving these warnings, the Titanic altered its course twice to steer clear of danger, but it did not reduce its speed. It continued its voyage at a speed of 21.5 knots, equivalent to 40 kilometers per hour. Then, on April 14, 1912, just 2 days later, 7 more ice warnings were received. But Captain Smith and his crew chose to ignore these alerts. They did not reduce the Titanic's speed. As the day came to an end, the sun went down and the temperature dropped. A notable detail about the night of April 14th was the absence of the moon. With no moonlight, visibility was significantly reduced that night. The ship had a crow's nest, a small platform situated high above, essentially serving as a lookout point. Someone was stationed up there to keep watch over the ship's path, to monitor for other vessels or any obstacles in the way. The person posted there had to endure extremely cold temperatures. The cold winds were blowing at a very high speed. Additionally, it was nighttime. These cold winds caused the eyes to water, making visibility difficult. At exactly 11:39 p.m., a man named Frederick Fleet was stationed in the crow's nest. Suddenly, he spotted a massive iceberg directly ahead of the ship. He quickly rang the bell 3 times to alert those below, then picked up the phone and contacted the officers on the bridge. He shouted that there was an iceberg ahead and that the ship needed to be steered away immediately. First Officer William received this urgent message and signaled the engine room to steer the ship toward the left. But unfortunately, the response came too late. Just 1 minute later, at 11:40 p.m., the ship collided with the iceberg. The Titanic represented a new era of luxurious living. The Titanic had departed from the port of Southampton, England. Among the passengers were many wealthy and influential individuals. The band was playing, the melodies were cheerful, and American ragtime dancers entertained the crowd. The exact time was 11:40 p.m. The iceberg scraped along the right side of the ship, and all of a sudden, she jerked upward quickly. This iceberg was not a small one. It measured about 200 by 400 feet, roughly the size of a football field, and was tall enough to be level with the crow's nest. Scientists estimate that the iceberg weighed around 1.5 million tons. The front right portion of the Titanic struck the iceberg, more precisely, the area near the bow. So, what is the bow? As shown in this picture, the frontmost part of the ship is known as the bow. The section above the bow is called the stern, and the protruding part below is referred to as the keel. For approximately 10 seconds, the ship scraped along the iceberg, causing a massive dent to form. As a result, several small holes were torn into the main structure of the ship. You might wonder how that could even happen. How can a block of ice rip through metal? If you're thinking about the ice in your freezer, then of course, it can't. But remember, we're talking about a mountain-sized mass of ice. It's true that wood cannot slice through metal, yet your metal car can still be completely crushed if it crashes into a tree. In the same way, because the iceberg was so massive and heavy, it inflicted devastating damage to the Titanic. Just seconds after the collision, Captain Smith and the ship's architect, Thomas Andrews, arrived at the scene to assess the extent of the damage caused by the impact. Upon seeing it, they realized the ship was going to sink. They were utterly shocked by this realization. They had believed the ship was unsinkable. At the beginning of the video, I mentioned that this ship was thought to be unsinkable thanks to its remarkable safety features. There were two major safety elements that supported this belief. First, the ship had a double-bottomed hull. The main structure of a ship is called the hull. A double-bottom hull means there were two layers. Even if the bottom layer was damaged, the second layer could still protect the ship. Second, the hull was divided into 16 individual watertight compartments. Even if 4 out of those 16 compartments filled with water, the ship could still stay afloat. It wouldn't make a difference to the ship's ability to sail. However, the iceberg struck the side of the ship. This meant that the double-bottom hull was of no help, because the sides only had a single layer. Secondly, the impact was so intense that 6 out of the 16 watertight compartments were breached. Water began rushing into all of them. The limit for safety was 4 compartments. With 6 compartments taking in water, it became certain that the ship could not avoid sinking. The unsinkable ship was going to sink. 20 minutes after the collision at 12 a.m., Captain Smith ordered his crew to send out a distress signal via radio. There was hope that nearby ships might receive it and come to their aid. Senior radio operator Jack Phillips emerged as a hero in this situation. One after another, he kept transmitting distress calls, but there was no response. He sent another and another. Surely, some ship had to pick up their distress call. 20 minutes later, at 12:20 a.m., a ship named RMS Carpathia, which was located relatively near the Titanic, finally received the signal. Its operator spoke with Titanic's operator over the radio and directed the Carpathia to change course and head toward the Titanic to rescue them. The issue, though, was that despite being relatively close, the Carpathia was still 107 kilometers away. Even at its maximum speed, it would take around 3.5 hours to reach the Titanic. Could the Titanic remain afloat for 3.5 hours? In the meantime, other crew members launched flares and rockets into the sky, hoping that another nearby ship might notice them. But unfortunately, besides the Carpathia, no other ship responded. Meanwhile, Captain Smith gave the order to evacuate passengers using the lifeboats on board. According to standard protocol, women and children would be given priority. As for the passengers on the Titanic, they weren't very afraid. Most of them still believed that the Titanic was unsinkable, so they thought there was no need for concern. After all, the company that ran advertisements kept repeating this claim again and again. So yes, perhaps they had hit an iceberg, but the ship wasn't going to sink. That's why the first lifeboat that was lowered, which had a capacity of 65 people, carried only 28. Half of the lifeboat remained empty as it was sent down. As time passed, one compartment after another began filling with water. The ship started to tilt. Slowly, the passengers began to realize that the ship might actually sink. When this realization struck, chaos erupted. and people began to panic and run in every direction. By 1 a.m., so much water had flooded the front compartments that the bow of the ship had gone underwater. Because of this, the rear of the Titanic lifted up out of the water. The propellers at the back became visible above the surface. As the ship tilted this far, total pandemonium took over. People began fighting each other for a place in the lifeboats. The problem was that there was a shortage of lifeboats, only 20 in total, and they could carry only around 1,200 people. But there were approximately 2,200 people on board the ship. At 2:05 a.m., the final lifeboat was lowered from the Titanic. Yet 1,500 people were still on board. In the midst of the chaos, some tried to force their way into the remaining lifeboats, but others accepted their fate and remained behind on the ship. The end was chaotic. Everybody was crying, praying, trying to get into the few lifeboats that were left. Oh, it was, pretty sad at the end. According to eyewitnesses, the ship broke into two pieces at around 2:20 a.m., and then it slowly began to sink. It didn't even take 3 hours for the so-called unsinkable ship to go under. Of the 1,500 people still on board, some went down with the ship, and others who managed to swim died from hypothermia. The temperature of the water was -2 degrees Celsius. If you fall into water at that temperature, hypothermia will kill you within minutes. It's said that Titanic's captain, Edward Smith, remained at the wheel until the very end and went down with the ship. Some believe he may have committed suicide. The ship RMS Carpathia, which had set out to rescue Titanic, arrived at the site between 3:30 and 4 a.m. It had come to rescue the people aboard, but it was an hour too late. Following the Titanic disaster, many questions were raised and numerous controversies emerged. Investigations were carried out, and several unknown facts came to light that shocked everyone. How would you feel if I told you that there was another ship just 37 kilometers away from the Titanic that night? A ship that could have reached in time to save the passengers of the Titanic? It's true. The ship was the SS Californian. 1 hour before the Titanic struck the iceberg, the final iceberg warning came from the SS Californian. They had issued a warning: be cautious. There are numerous icebergs in this part of the ocean. After that, at 11:15 p.m., the radio operator aboard the Californian turned off the radio. The Californian had stopped moving for the night, aware of the surrounding danger. Since the ship had halted for the night and the radio was switched off, it did not receive the distress signal sent by the Titanic. The Californian was so close to the Titanic that passengers standing on the Titanic's deck could actually see the Californian on the horizon. As officers were helping passengers board the lifeboats, one officer even pointed out that a ship was visible in the distance. He remarked that it would soon come to their rescue, so there was no need for panic. But despite the rockets and flares launched into the sky, the Californian never came. It is reported that after 12 a.m., crew members on the Californian did, in fact, see the rockets being fired from the Titanic. They even informed their captain, Stanley Lord, but he insisted those were not distress signals. He believed the wealthy passengers on the Titanic were simply celebrating and partying. Had Captain Lord of the Californian taken those rockets and flares seriously that night, many lives aboard the Titanic might have been saved. The next morning, when the Californian turned its radio back on, it finally received the Titanic's SOS calls. They reached the disaster site, but by then, it was too late. All they found were dead bodies floating in the freezing water. Both official inquiries held after the incident placed blame on Captain Stanley Lord of the Californian. But such a massive tragedy cannot be pinned on one man alone. There were others who shared the responsibility. For example, as I mentioned earlier, there were not enough lifeboats on board. Why? Because the company that built the ship believed the Titanic was unsinkable, so they thought extra lifeboats were unnecessary. In addition to that, Titanic's captain didn't even conduct safety drills. One safety drill had been scheduled for the very day Titanic hit the iceberg, but Captain Smith canceled it, believing it was unnecessary because the ship was supposedly unsinkable. Another grave mistake was made by steersman Robert Hickens, who was manning the wheel that night. When the iceberg alarm was raised, the officer on deck instructed that the ship should be turned left. But in a moment of panic, Robert Hickens misunderstood the command and instead steered the ship to the right. That was the wrong direction, straight toward the iceberg. By the time he realized his mistake, it was already too late. The British inquiry also concluded that the Titanic had received multiple iceberg warnings and was advised to proceed cautiously. Yet the ship continued to sail at full speed. Why was that the case? Why didn't the captain reduce the speed? There are several theories surrounding this decision. One of the most popular theories suggests that Joseph Bruce Ismay, the chairman and managing director of the White Star Line, the company that built the Titanic, influenced Captain Smith and pressured him to maintain the ship's high speed. There was immense pressure from the company to ensure the Titanic completed its maiden voyage in just 6 days. This was not only to meet a deadline, but to break a record, to demonstrate that the Titanic wasn't just the largest and most expensive ship, but also the fastest. A particular incident that supports this theory occurred on April 14th at 2 p.m. When Captain Smith received another ice warning, he showed it to Joseph Bruce Ismay and suggested they reduce the ship's speed. But instead of taking action, Joseph reportedly stuffed the warning paper into his pocket. He didn't want the crew or the passengers to become aware of the danger, and he certainly didn't want the ship to slow down. This single tragedy forever changed the global shipping industry. As a result, many new safety regulations and standards were introduced to prevent such disasters in the future. In 1914, the International Ice Patrol was established to alert ships about icebergs in their paths. A major treaty known as the International Convention for the Safety of Life at Sea SOLAS was also signed. This treaty introduced several new safety requirements for ships. One of the key changes was a new regulation concerning lifeboats. It became mandatory for ships to carry enough lifeboats for every passenger on board. When the Titanic sank, its wreckage remained lost beneath the ocean for more than 70 years. In September 1985, an American ocean explorer named Robert Ballard, along with a French oceanographer, successfully discovered the Titanic wreck. They found it lying 3,800 meters, 3.8 kilometers below the sea surface. The ship had broken into 2 parts, and the pieces were discovered 600 meters apart. Today, more than a century after it sank, the Titanic's remains are gradually deteriorating. This is what the actual ship looked like, and this is what's left of it today. Reports indicate that bacteria and other microorganisms are steadily eating away at the metal structure of the wreck. Experts predict that by the year 2030, the Titanic will have completely disintegrated underwater. Even now, over 110 years later, the fascination with the Titanic endures in the hearts and minds of people. In 2012, an Australian billionaire named Clive Palmer announced plans to construct Titanic 2, a replica of the original Titanic. He even stated that it would follow the exact same route as the original voyage. All the components of the ship were to be built exactly like those of the original Titanic. Initially, the project was scheduled for completion in 2016, but due to multiple delays, it remained unfinished even by 2022. It is said that public interest in the project waned, because if an exact replica of the Titanic were built, it would lack modern features like TV and Wi-Fi.